End the Fed is a really great slogan, but getting from here to there, from where we are today, living under the largest government in history, to, maybe a land of the free is going to take some serious dedication and really, really smart strategy. So today, I've got a case study exploring the foundation for this that's being set in Utah by a lot of great action, state legislation, and human action since 2011. But first of all, before getting to that, welcome and thank you so much for joining me here on the Path to Liberty. My name is Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for April 10th, 2024. And I want to kick this off with an important reminder on what happens with a fiat paper money system where they can just print more and more of it. As Benjamin Franklin pointed out in 1779, I believe, the depreciation of the American paper is solely owing to the existence of excessive quantities. So he's pointing out that the more that they print, the less value it has, and that causes what we call price inflation today. And here's George Washington. Paper money has had the effect in your state. This is a letter to Jabez Bowen in Rhode Island. It has had the effect in your state that it ever will have: to ruin commerce, oppress the honest, and open a door to every species of fraud and injustice. So George Washington warned us that the monetary system we have today would ruin commerce, correct. It oppresses the honest, correct, and it opens the door to every species of fraud and injustice. We know that it has fueled the largest government in history, and that gave us a consolidated system that Thomas Jefferson warned would be filled with corruption, plunder, and waste. It looks like these guys absolutely nailed it. I don't want to get too deep into that particular thing because I want to look at this case study in Utah, but I do want to point you to an important episode that I did a couple of months ago. Tyranny 101, how the Federal Reserve powers the monster state. Without the Federal Reserve, the federal government wouldn't be able to do very much of what it does today. It wouldn't be able to run these massive debts and deficits. It would not be able to run all these programs, socialist, domestic, foreign policy. It would be naturally limited by the amount of money that it could spend. And without the borrowing power, the printing press of the Federal Reserve, it wouldn't be able to do too much. But let's get right to this. Mike Meharry, in a new article we published yesterday, points out that "End the Fed" is a popular slogan among supporters of sound money, and actually supporters of the Constitution and liberty. It should be. But it's almost certain that Congress will never shut down its own money printer. So as the founders repeatedly advised, it's up to the people of the states to get the job done. And that's exactly the step-by-step kind of approach we've been seeing in Utah since 2011. There, a combination, Mike writes, of at least 4 state laws, plus plenty of steps forward by businesses and individuals, has built what is likely the most robust foundation for the advancement of gold and silver as money in the United States. The founders and old revolutionaries, Mike writes, understood this incremental approach and used it to great success. And here's one that I've cited many times from Thomas Jefferson. I can't repeat it often enough. In a letter to Charles Clay in 1790, he took a very similar position in a letter to James Madison after passage of the Kentucky Resolutions, the very next day after the passage of the Kentucky Resolutions, calling for nullification of the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798. But here's how Jefferson put it. The ground of liberty is to be gained by inches. We must be contented to secure what we can get from time to time and eternally press forward for what is yet to get. And why? Jefferson told us it takes time to persuade men to do what is even for their own good. Anyways, back to Meharry. He points out that the Federal Reserve and the U.S. government have monopolized money and locked us into this fiat monetary system for more than a century. 1913 was a really bad year. So was 1791. We won't establish a sound money system in a day by passing a single bill. However, he writes, an incremental step-by-step approach, just like what Thomas Jefferson said, is proven to be effective. Let's get something that actually gives us some W's, right? It just takes more time and energy. This is exactly how Utah has evolved into a growing haven for sound money. They started off in 2011 by laying the groundwork with the passage of something called the Utah Legal Tender Act. It made gold and silver coins issued by the federal government. That's it. Gold and silver coins issued by the federal government, legal tender in the state. It's something that all 50 states should have been doing all along as required by the Constitution, but they've all been ignoring it all along. So they actually started to turn things around in 2011. And Meharry puts it this way. It also specified, quote, that the exchange of gold and silver coins for another form of legal tender does not create any individual income or sales tax liability. In effect, it repealed both the state sales and capital gains taxes on gold and silver. And if you just a quick aside, and I've mentioned this on the show here, an analogy that Meharry has put together, he's like, basically, let's say you went to a store and you wanted to exchange one form of money for another, $5, and you want to get a different form for it. Hey, can you get me some change for this? And then they charge you a 35-cent tax. The odds of you doing that probably goes down unless you absolutely needed it. And that's what they've been doing with, for example, a sales tax on gold, because if you exchange gold or silver to something, they don't think you're just taking one form of money and swapping it for fiat dollars. Let's say you need $25 or whatever it is for an ounce of silver. Maybe it's closer to 30 now, and you wanted 30 notes of fiat for whatever dumb reason, but let's say you needed it. What they're actually considering that is a sale of the silver for the US dollar, and therefore they're going to collect a sales tax. And then on top of it, a lot of places they're going to charge you a capital gains tax, because if you purchase the silver at $20 and then now today it's worth $30, they're going to charge you another income tax on that $10, quote, capital gains, rather than treating it as money. When they tax it, they're basically saying that it is not money at all. It is a mere investment vehicle, and it's discouraging its use. So removing the taxes, sales and capital gains on a state level in 2011 was a very, very important step. We thought it was probably pretty small at the time. But then again, in 2012, they followed up with a second bill expanding the Utah Legal Tender Act and then renaming it the Specie Legal Tender Act. So it's now the Specie Legal Tender Act. And Mike points out that most significantly, as the title suggests, the 2012 measure expanded the definition of specie legal tender beyond only coins authorized by the feds to include any gold and silver coins approved by the state. So now the state is making the determination of what gold and silver they're going to consider money. This is another step forward. It's not perfect freedom by any stretch of the imagination, but it does actually remove them from some control of the central government. And Mike points out that the 2012 expansion also clarified some of the tax issues as well. But here from our 2012 report, it's kind of cool to look back on this and see how far we've been tracking this. I don't think we actually covered it in 2011, but we got a blog post from Doug Jaden, who I miss, who's doing other things these days, but he pointed out that by allowing additional specie to be used as legal tender, the Utah legislature freed its citizens from potential supply constraints imposed by the use of only U.S. minted gold and silver coin. More importantly, the people of the state of Utah now defined what specie is considered constitutional tender, further distancing themselves from potential control of their competing currency by Washington, D.C. I'm not a fan of calling gold and silver a competing currency. It actually is money, and the U.S. dollar has been the competing currency kind of thrust upon us through ignorance and force and the like. So back to Mike Meharry. He said the impact of the 2012, the Specie Legal Tender Act, has been profound. It opened the door for the development of a robust gold and silver market in the state. With some legal hurdles cleared away by this legal tender law, the United Precious Metals Association, it's called UPMA, in partnership with something called the Alpine Gold Exchange, set up what we can basically call the state's first gold bank. So we now have private businesses saying, well, this is legal now here. Let's get to work. They've removed a restriction on this. Mike points out that the UPMA is a nonprofit member cooperative that offers bank-like services to its members using legal tender precious metals. UPMA is similar to a credit union offering services from other providers to its membership, much like the AARP or other such associations. So a lot of people say, well, how can you use gold and silver? How can you use this as money? You can't do this. Where am I going to store it? Is it safe? They have all these questions because they never thought through how it might work out, or they've never seen it play out in practice. And that's why what's happening in Utah, or what has been happening in Utah for over a decade now, for 13 years, is so important. And I'll get into how it is spread to other states as well. And here from the United Precious Metals Association website, It was established in response to this passage of the Utah Specie Legal Tender Act in early 2011. UPMA aims to provide viable choices in currency, offering accounts denominated in U.S. minted gold and silver dollars, as well as now what they've also created, free Goldback accounts. We'll get more on Goldbacks in a moment. Members can easily access their wealth by means of linked debit cards, wire transfers, physical checks, or by taking physical possessions of their holdings. So this is really a tool to store. It's a tool to use as money, actual money, rather than the tool that they use to power the largest government in history that we use and, of course, accept very begrudgingly, but it's very important to be able to continue doing commerce. This is something that is facilitating actual commerce. The debit card is a biggie because it solves one of the biggest problems that we're always being told about. How am I supposed, most of my things that I do now, of course, there are people who only do business with physical transactions in person. That's cool. You are a very small percentage of people. The vast majority of people and the vast majority of transactions are conducted, well, electronically. Online is getting huge. People who pay for, just literally paying for the service to be able to live stream and broadcast to various different platforms. We couldn't do that because we can't go to their office and pay for them. We have to be able to pay for it electronically. So the debit card is very important. It solves this central problem of doing business, doing commerce with precious metals because they're doing all the conversions in the background. And for the merchant, it just works like a regular debit card. They get their cash that they want. You can also do business with people and exchange back and forth who have other gold accounts. So you're not actually converting it to fiat, but that's all that other stuff is logistics. So basically, you can actually spend gold and silver, even on the smallest transactions. You can do a $1 transaction. It doesn't matter. You don't have to break it up into little bits or chew off a piece like all the jokes that people think that they're making when we talk about sound money. They think they got a gotcha on that, but this is absurd. Here's also Alpine Gold Exchange. We can see some of the services they offer, like gold and silver legal tender. Gold and silver lease is an interesting one. They have Goldback notes and also a linked Visa debit card. And then in 2019, they created the Goldback. And I'm going to get to that in just a moment. But first of all, I want to point out that all the things that I'm talking about, the articles, the legislation passed by Utah, links to UPMA and Alpine Gold Exchange, information on the Goldback, etc. All this will be linked to in the show notes. Alan Mosley organizes a blog post for every single episode over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. And I get that published a couple of hours after the live stream is done. You will find for every single episode, you're going to find all the different platforms we're on. Of course, we live stream on the mainstream video platforms like YouTube and LinkedIn and X. And we also live stream on Twitch and probably a few others as well. But we're also live streaming over at Odyssey.com and Rumble.com. We have the audio-only podcast edition all over the place. So you're going to find all the platforms. And then you're going to find a section with show links that Alan puts together. That way you can read and learn more in context on your own time. And while we're here, I do want to take a quick moment and say hello to everyone out in the live chat. I appreciate you being here, whether you're live or in the archive. This is your first episode, or you've been here for every single one since day one. There's John and Howard, Arian, Sunny, man, there's some long comments. Yuggelis, John Rame, Alan Mosley is good to see. Gypsy Magic over on Rumble, Render, Brewster, and a few others. I appreciate you all being here. I'll read through more of the comments a little bit later today or tomorrow, or if I get a chance near the end of the show here as well, and get back to comments and questions. I get a lot of great ideas for future episodes, so I really appreciate your feedback. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty is where you're going to find the blog post for this episode with all the show links and other platforms and every episode we've ever done. So let's get back to this step-by-step case study out of Utah. So in 2019, because of the growth of one to the next, to the next, to the next, now we get something called the Goldback. This is a local voluntary medium of exchange. They're dollar-denominated notes made from physical gold. So you basically have something that is, it's shaped like a paper dollar, but it's made out of actual gold. They created a process that turns pure gold into spendable physical form for small transactions. They're absolutely gorgeous. There's a premium, so they're not cheap to get, but there's something to it as well. Goldback describes it as the world's first physical interchangeable gold money that is designed to accommodate even small transactions. So this is another tool that's been built out of the Utah Specie Legal Tender Act because of it, that allows people to actually spend with physical notes in small amounts. Rather than carrying out an ounce of gold or a tenth or a hundredth ounce of gold, they can actually break it down into ones and fives, etc. So they've been launched in a number of states, but it started in Utah. And the United Precious Metals Association General Counsel Larry Hilton, he noted that the Goldback is legal tender in the state of Utah only because of the Specie Legal Tender Act. Here from their website, this means that under Utah state law, Goldback is a voluntary legal tender in Utah. And Mike Meharry points out that it has been enthusiastically embraced throughout the state. The UPMA estimates that Goldback acceptance may be as high as 50% among small business owners. Now, I don't know if there's many or any big companies out there, but you can find it all over the place. And they list it on their website. There's gas stations and salons, all kinds of small businesses that are deciding, yes, we will accept it. Now, does that mean it's being used as money a ton? I don't know how to track that. But the more that you have this kind of adoption, the more that people put up signs that say it's accepted here, the more that people who are enthusiastic about real money rather than supporting the monster state that is Washington, D.C. and their vassal states that submit to them at every turn, well, the more that you have this, the more that you can build this foundation. That's exactly what Thomas Jefferson pointed out. Every step, the ground of liberty is to be gained by inches, and each one of these things is a step towards liberty. And Mike says because of this strong demand, both inside Utah and from other states, because even at UPMA, you can set up an account whether you live in Utah or not. You can buy Goldbacks anywhere. I mean, well, they're not available at every retailer, but you can get them. You're not locked out from owning these things. Maybe some states will not allow you to use it as legal tender. But then again, if you find someone who is interested in doing barter exchange, then you can find that in your own area as well. So anyways, because of the strong demand, Mike writes, both inside Utah and from other states, the company has been able to launch Goldback editions in other states as well. So the following year, so first 2019 in Utah. In 2020, they released the Nevada Goldback, or Nevada, I apologize if I get that wrong. These will all be linked to in the show notes as well. In 2020 as well in New Hampshire, and the adoption in New Hampshire has been really, really awesome as well. I keep learning more about this. The people in there for the Free State Project are really, really hardcore about adoption and implementation of stuff outside the central government system. So we see a lot of adoption happening in New Hampshire as well. In 2022, we got the Wyoming Goldback, and in South Dakota, in 2023, the South Dakota Goldback. Now, anyways, back to Utah. In 2022, so now we've got a couple of laws on the books. Specie legal tender, they've expanded it. They've created this gold bank, a linked gold account debit card. Now you have physical spendable gold with the Goldback. And then in 2022, they specifically in a law passed a law that exempts Goldbacks from state sales tax as well, because there was some confusion over this, and I think some people were actually charging it, or maybe there wasn't confusion and it clearly was still a sales tax. I don't know the background, but they actually went back to the drawing board. House Bill 268 in 2022. They opened the door for the use of Goldbacks to grow even further. They were already growing, but what they did was they expressly repealed the sales tax on the sale of all Goldback notes. And Meharry describes it like this. Specifically, the law exempts, quote, sales of a note, leaf, foil, or film if the item is used as currency, does not constitute legal tender of a state, the United States, or a foreign nation, and C, has gold, silver, or platinum metallic content to 50% or more, exclusive of any transparent polymer, blah, blah, blah. So basically, it's just in technical legal language, if it isn't already stamped by a government, it isn't created by a government, and it's in kind of a note, leaf, or foil form, which I guess you would describe these Goldbacks as, then they're no longer going to charge sales tax. Again, you're removing another barrier to their use in day-to-day commerce. So this passage and success of the Utah Specie Legal Tender Act, not only have we seen the Goldback get expanded into a number of other places. It has also set a precedent for other states to pass at least early versions of the Legal Tender Act in their own state. We saw this first happen, I think, in Oklahoma, then Wyoming, and then most recently it was 2023 in Arkansas. There's a number of states that are considering legislation like this for this year. Hopefully we'll get one or two more on the books, but they're all these other states. Now we're up to 4 states. They all have laws treating gold and silver as legal tender. And because of what has happened in Utah, we know what they can do to follow up step by step. Now, some places they try to get it all done at once. We generally recommend against that because that's almost, unless you really, really got it down. In almost every situation, the more you try to get done at the same time, the more likely it is not to get done. So it's hard to determine exactly what the best strategy is for each place. You want to go further than what's easy, but you don't want to go so far that you can't get anything done. So back to it. In Utah, here in 2024, they took even another step in supporting sound money by authorizing the state to hold gold and silver in reserve. Now, under this new law, the state treasurer, it goes into effect, I think, in May of this year. The state treasurer is now authorized to invest up to 10% of sum of state funds in silver, gold, platinum, copper, or palladium. And Meharry describes it like this. Holding gold and silver will allow the state of Utah to shield its assets and hedge against rapidly depreciating Federal Reserve notes. I think that's a good way to describe it. Holding gold and silver in reserve could also create a pathway for Utah to maintain financial independence should the U.S. dollar collapse, a very real possibility as the world moves away from the greenback as its reserve currency. And then also this year in 2024, and this is not directly in support of sound money, but in a way I think it really is. They passed a law to remove a potential central bank digital currency from the definition of legal tender in the Specie Legal Tender Act. So now the Specie Legal Tender Act specifically says a central bank digital currency is not considered legal tender in the state of Utah. It's a different approach than what we've seen in other states, really only addressing the definition of money under the Uniform Commercial Code. They did that as well in House Bill 164 in Utah this year, and that goes into effect in May of this year as well. Meharry describes the whole process like this, and it's really, I'm just scratching the surface, giving you guys some highlights, but all this will be linked to in the show notes so you can read and learn more. Mike says this progression in support of sound money in Utah demonstrates the effectiveness of Thomas Jefferson's inch-by-inch strategy in action. We see it playing out before our very eyes. He said the first version of the Utah Specie Legal Tender Act was relatively limited in scope. Again, going back to 2011, all they did was it's actually not as limited as what we've seen in a few other states, but certainly in comparison to what we see now today. What they did was they only took gold and silver coins already issued by the federal government and treated them the way they're supposed to be, and then removed the sales and state capital gains taxes on this. Now, in some places, like, for example, in Wisconsin this year, they just removed sales tax. And in other states, they just take one step at a time. They address the tax issue, and then maybe they can follow up with legal tender. So in New Hampshire, I don't think they've ever had any of the taxes, even though the state doesn't actually look at gold and silver as legal tender. This is really opened. It depends on what type of people are there. Because there's no tax man coming to get them, this has made it a lot easier for people in the Free State Project to go absolutely nuts pushing gold and silver as money. They're like, well, if it's not taxed, then what's the difference if someone else wants to accept it? And I think that's also a process you can approach as well. More of a without getting approval type of a situation is good as well. So it's a different strategy in different areas based on what types of things people want to do. So Mike says it was limited in scope, but subsequent steps broadened it, and the results are undeniable. Utah has become the sound money leader in the United States. Of course, there is still a lot more work to do, more steps to take, and more inches to be gained. And most of the work that needs to be done in Utah is really up to the people themselves, choosing to use real money more and more often in everyday transactions. And I always think of Samuel Adams and his great essay under the pen name Candidus in the Boston Gazette. This is the publication that was kind of the mouthpiece of the Sons of Liberty back in 1771. He said, instead of sitting down satisfied with the efforts we have already made, which is the wish of our enemies. The necessity of the times more than ever calls for our utmost circumspection, deliberation, fortitude, and perseverance. Now, we take this strategy, whether it's from Samuel Adams or Thomas Jefferson or so many others, we take it very seriously here at the TAC. They took on the largest government in history. They set up a system, and we are following their rules for enforcing that system and taking on the largest government in history once again today. Why not? We know it's worked. That doesn't mean everything that they said was right, certainly, but we can learn things and apply them today, see how it plays out, and then use what works. And we're seeing this step-by-step strategy being incredibly effective. We even put it on as a phrase. There's a Latin phrase, concordia res parve crescunt, which we put on, you probably can't really see it here, but it's on our membership cards. It's embossed. It's pretty cool. This is a phrase that the penman of the American Revolution, John Dickinson, used. And he used it. It means small things grow great by concord. So every step towards freedom can create another step. It can rally people to the cause. He signed off one of his famous letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania in 1767 with that message. Anyways, you can get one of these membership cards with an annual, a 5-year, or lifetime membership. Or if you only got a couple of bucks, you can get an online-only membership for as little as $2 a month. You save us some shipping. So if you want that as an option as well, you can find that all over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Anything you can do to consider, to give us some consideration and to join us today, putting your financial faith behind our work will help us do this kind of thing more and more often. Not only doing the work on the ground to get grassroots support for these types of efforts, but also everything from writing the articles, researching, reporting on legislation, getting information, action alerts out to more people, spreading the word. All this takes time and energy and manpower to get done. So nothing helps us do this work more than the financial faith and support of our members. 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. So if you got a couple of bucks of that dirty government fiat, please consider throwing it our way. And I do want to take a quick moment to say a very, very huge thank you to just a small number of people who have joined us lately. There's Stephen in Kentucky, Donald in Florida, Janet in Illinois, Randall in Wisconsin, and Carrie in Oklahoma. Anyways, I really appreciate you spending some of your time with me today. I hope this was interesting. I hope it was educational. I hope it motivates you to take some action in support of liberty and outside the Federal Reserve System. We can do every tiny step. We don't have to be able to try to figure out how to live off the grid right now, today, because not everyone has the ability to pull that off. Well, I mean, we have the ability, but maybe logistically it's not going to happen. So every small step that we can take can push the needle. And when millions of people start doing that, it can have a huge impact. So again, I really appreciate you being here. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I hope you have an awesome day, and I hope to see you next time here on the Path to Liberty.